Who mistakes a billionaire CEO for a nanny and then tells him he's doing a great job? That's exactly what Elizabeth Coffey did on a blind date she didn't even want to attend. She thought he was just a sweet man in a hoodie helping a little boy tie his shoes. She didn't know the boy was his son. She didn't know the man ran one of the biggest tech companies in the country. And she definitely didn't expect either of them to show up at her workplace 2 days later with a hand-drawn invitation that would change everything. What started as a misunderstanding would soon become a story of healing, trust, and a boy who decided which grown-up deserved a second chance. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. It started with a pair of Velcro sneakers, a spilled juice box, and one very wrong assumption. Elizabeth Coffey adjusted her coat as she stepped into the tiny brunch cafe in the West End, mentally reminding herself she was doing this as a favor to her best friend. A blind date, 30 minutes max, one coffee, no last names. If it went terribly, she could always fake a work emergency and run. She wasn't expecting to find a man kneeling on the floor by the coat rack, gently fastening the straps on a 6-year-old boy's sneakers. The boy had soft blonde curls and oversized headphones with little dinosaur stickers on the sides. He clutched a juice box like it was the last one on earth. The man beside him looked up, just briefly, and smiled. Warm, tired, disarming. Elizabeth smiled back automatically. "You're doing great," she said, nodding toward the sneakers. The man blinked, then chuckled softly. "Thanks. It's a team effort." "You're the nanny?" she asked casually, her voice light. The boy glanced up. The man hesitated. "Something like that." That's when her phone buzzed. A text from her friend Tess. "Table 4. He's already there. Don't be weird." Elizabeth glanced at the number on the corner booth. Table 4. The man was now standing beside the boy, adjusting the little jacket collar. The boy tugged on his sleeve and pointed to the booth. Elizabeth's stomach dropped. "No, wait, she said, taking a step forward, confused. Are you Silas?" The man extended a hand. "Silas Mitchell. And this," he said, gesturing to the boy now climbing into the booth, "is Russell." Elizabeth stared. "You brought your son?" Silas nodded. "I did." There was a long beat of silence. "Well," Elizabeth said slowly, "I was going to fake an emergency, but I have questions now." Silas almost smiled. They sat. The booth was snug with floral cushions and chipped mugs, the kind of place where time forgot to hurry. Elizabeth folded her coat and tried not to feel completely blindsided. Russell took out a tiny plastic dinosaur from his pocket and stood it on the edge of the table like it was supervising the meal. He didn't speak, didn't look directly at her, but he wasn't uncomfortable either, just observant. Silas ordered pancakes for Russell, black coffee for himself, and gave Elizabeth the freedom to choose without pressure. She picked banana waffles and tried not to look too awkward. "You weren't expecting a kid," Silas said finally, breaking the silence. "I wasn't expecting a man in a hoodie with kind eyes to be the date," she shot back gently. "Fair. I thought you were the nanny." Silas nodded once. "I get that a lot." There was something in his voice. Not quite amusement, not quite sadness. Just fatigue. The quiet kind. Elizabeth sipped her water. "Okay, so how does a man like you end up on a blind date with a woman like me?" Silas raised an eyebrow. "A woman like you?" I teach art classes to preschoolers and live in an apartment where the heating only works if you threaten it. You look like you own buildings. I do, he said simply, but I haven't been inside most of them in a while. There was another beat of silence. Russell lined up 2 more dinosaurs. His little fingers worked with quiet precision. Elizabeth smiled. I like your team, she said to him. Strong lineup. Russell's eyes flicked to hers, then away again. But his mouth curled up, just a little. Silas noticed. His shoulders relaxed a fraction. Russell's not big on talking to strangers, Silas said. Or most people. That's okay. Dinosaurs are excellent conversation starters. Elizabeth reached into her bag and pulled out a dinosaur sticker she kept for her students. She slid it across the table without a word. Russell hesitated, then took it. Silas watched the exchange like it was something sacred. By the time the check arrived, something strange had happened. Elizabeth wasn't thinking about running. She was laughing. Russell had quietly slid her one of his pancakes as a peace offering. Silas had told a story about Russell once insisting on wearing a cape to his board meeting, and how no one had dared question it. The air was easy, real, but the truth still loomed, even if she hadn't fully named it yet. As they stepped out into the drizzle, Elizabeth turned to Silas. Just for the record, she said, this was not the worst blind date I've ever had. Silas smirked. That's a dangerously low bar. I once got ghosted mid-appetizer. Ouch. They stood for a second too long. Russell tugged on Silas's sleeve. Then he looked up at Elizabeth and, in a voice barely above a whisper, said, Miss Ellie. Elizabeth blinked. What? Russell repeated. Miss Ellie. Silas met her eyes. That's what he's calling you now. Elizabeth's chest ached unexpectedly. She crouched to his level. Well, Mr. Russell, she said, offering her hand. You've got good taste in pancakes. Russell gave her a rare, small smile. Silas didn't say anything, but in that moment, he looked at Elizabeth like someone who hadn't known how lonely he'd become until something began to change. 2 days later, Elizabeth was cleaning up glitter from her second art class of the day when the receptionist waved her over. There's something for you. She expected a package, maybe more sticker donations. But it was a paper bag with no name, just a child's drawing taped to the front. A green dinosaur with a speech bubble that said, "Wanna come again?" Inside, a printed scan of Russell's Pancake Dinosaur Army, a box of new art crayons, 2 tickets to the children's exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art, and a note written in tidy, even print. You made him smile. That's not something I see often. Would you like to do that again? Maybe this time with ice cream involved? Silas, not a nanny. Still not wearing a suit. Elizabeth read it twice, then 3 more times, and slowly, without even realizing, she smiled back. The invitation was still taped to her fridge. Elizabeth had meant to take it down, at least after the 3rd time she caught herself smiling at it during breakfast, but somehow it stayed. She hadn't said yes right away. She'd waited 2 days, then called the museum to check if the tickets were real. They were. And only then sent a reply to the number written on the back of the envelope. Museum. 3 p.m. But I'm not wearing anything with dinosaurs on it this time. He wrote back instantly. Deal. Russell's covering that part. Saturday arrived gray and blustery, the kind of weather that made most people stay home and drink tea. But Elizabeth pulled on her boots, fixed her scarf, and caught herself practicing small talk in the mirror before heading out. She wasn't nervous. She was curious. The museum was quiet when she arrived, not empty, but not crowded either. A perfect space for voices to carry and thoughts to settle. She spotted them almost immediately. Russell was standing near a sculpture made entirely out of pencils, his eyes wide. Silas stood beside him, coat open, dark sweater beneath, looking more relaxed than last time. He saw her before she saw him. "Hey," she said, brushing hair from her face. "You clean up well." He smiled. "I tried." Russell vetoed the tie. Russell turned and held up a small notebook. "I brought a map," he said solemnly. Elizabeth blinked. "Of the museum?" "No," Russell said. "Of the best parts." Silas gave her a look. One that said, "This is what I live for." They wandered slowly, Russell leading the way like a small general. His map was a series of stickers and arrows pointing to places with cool stuff, including the dinosaur skeleton replica, a hall of mirrors, and an exhibit of sound and light installations he called the Space Tunnel. Elizabeth watched him closely. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was with intent. He described one sculpture as a frozen tornado and another as metal music you can't hear. She was quietly blown away. Silas stayed a step behind most of the time, giving them space. But she noticed the way his eyes never left Russell. Protective but not suffocating. Present. "You're good with him," she said during a break on a bench outside the cafe. Silas shrugged. "I try. He's not the easiest kid to read sometimes." "I disagree," Elizabeth replied. "He's just honest. Doesn't waste words." Silas looked at her then. "Most people don't notice that." She looked back. "Most people don't listen." That landed heavier than she expected. Inside the museum cafe, they shared ice cream and warm pretzels. Russell insisted on chocolate for everyone. Silas tried to argue, but Elizabeth was already nodding. They talked about art, about Russell's fascination with dinosaurs, and eventually, hesitantly, about Silas's work. "You really don't dress like a CEO?" she teased, licking a spoon. "I don't like suits," he replied. "Or press. Or people assuming they know who I am. Must be hard to avoid that. It used to be. Now I just stop going where I'm expected." Elizabeth stirred her ice cream slowly. "And what about today? Was this expected?" Silas was quiet for a moment. "No," he said, "but I'm glad I came." They were heading toward the exit, Russell skipping slightly ahead, when Elizabeth felt it. The stillness. The moment right before something shifts. She turned, catching Silas's expression mid-thought. "What is it?" she asked. He looked at her, uncertain. "Do you ever wonder what you'd be doing if one day had gone differently?" She blinked. "All the time. I wonder if I'd still be this person, if I hadn't lost her." It was the first time he mentioned Russell's mother. Elizabeth didn't speak, just waited. "She was calm," he said. "Where I'm fire, she was water. Quiet but not weak." Russell's smile looks like hers. There was grief in his voice. Not fresh, but not settled either. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Silas nodded once. "Me too." And then, before the silence could stretch too far, Russell tugged on Elizabeth's sleeve. He held up his notebook again. A new page. A drawing of the three of them, stick figures, sure, but unmistakably them. One with headphones, one with a scarf, and one with really tall hair. Silas, apparently. Elizabeth grinned. "We're art now." Russell pointed to the caption he'd written underneath. "Team Unexpected." Silas choked on a laugh. Elizabeth just beamed. But somewhere else in the museum, A woman with a phone was taking a picture. She wasn't paparazzi. Not exactly. But she recognized Silas Mitchell. Most people in finance did. And in the background of her photo, just barely, was Elizabeth, smiling. Later that night, she'd post it to her business gossip blog with the caption, "Reclusive CEO seen at art museum with unknown woman and child. The Mitchell mystery deepens." It would be shared 6,000 times before morning. But Elizabeth didn't know that yet. She only knew that for the first time in a long time, she'd said yes to something she didn't plan and didn't regret it. Started small. A blurry photo, a quiet blog post, a few Finance World followers raising their eyebrows over brunch. But by the time Elizabeth walked into work Monday morning, her name wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to headlines. She was halfway through prepping finger paints for the morning art class when her coworker Tara appeared in the doorway, looking pale. "Did you see this?" Elizabeth wiped her hands on a towel. "See what?" Tara turned her phone around. The screen showed a cropped image, a museum cafe, 3 figures leaning over a table. Silas's profile unmistakable. Russell mid-laugh. Elizabeth smiling softly, caught in motion. The caption beneath, "CEO Silas Mitchell spotted with mystery woman and son. More than just a date?" Her stomach dropped. What is this? It's on 3 gossip sites already. Twitter's dragging you. And someone in the comments already found the center's address. Elizabeth's hands went cold. She pressed them to the counter to steady herself. "It's probably a mistake. They'll move on." Tara hesitated. "You might want to check your email." The message from the director was short. Too short. "We need to discuss some concerns raised by parents. Please stop by my office before noon." By the time she got there, 2 others were already waiting, board members, tight smiles, and careful phrasing. "It's not about your performance," one said. "Just optics," said the other. Elizabeth's chest tightened. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said quietly. "No one's accusing you," they replied. "But you've been linked to a very public figure. There are questions about the nature of your relationship and about influence." Elizabeth blinked. "Influence? On who?" "A 6-year-old with crayons." They didn't laugh. "We're placing you on temporary leave," the director said. "Just until things quiet down." The rest of the meeting blurred. She walked out holding her scarf like armor. Outside, the wind had picked up, but it wasn't the cold that made her shiver. She didn't text Silas. Not right away. What would she say? "Hey, your lifestyle just wrecked mine? Your son drew me into a comic and now I'm trending?" She didn't even know if he knew. But he did. Silas was in the middle of a quarterly meeting when his assistant Laurel leaned in and whispered, "You need to see this." He glanced at her phone. The image. The headline. The hundreds of comments. And then, in bold beneath the top article, "Sources say the woman is a preschool art teacher. Is this Mitchell's new charitable endeavor or something more?" His jaw clenched. "Call them off," he muttered. Laurel frowned. "The press?" "No. The lawyers. The board. Anyone who thinks they get to speak for me." She hesitated. "They're going to push back. Let them." That night, Elizabeth sat on the floor of her apartment surrounded by silence. Her phone buzzed with texts from Tess, from old classmates, from people she hadn't heard from in years. Some were curious. Some were cruel. She turned the phone off. Her inbox pinged again anyway. She didn't cry. Not yet. But she felt something inside her fold, the soft part, the one she usually kept safe. The part that had dared to hope. Across the city, in a penthouse he barely called home, Silas poured a glass of whiskey and stared at the photo again. He hadn't meant for this. He hadn't planned any of it. But the way Elizabeth had looked at Russell like he was worth listening to, it had undone something in Silas he didn't even realize had snapped. And now the world was treating her like a prop. A social strategy. an accessory to his grief. He hated it. And worse, he hadn't protected her from it. Russell sat on the rug behind him, sketchbook in his lap. He hadn't spoken much all evening. At one point, he looked up and asked quietly, "Did she leave because of me?" Silas turned fast. "No, buddy. She didn't leave you." "Then why won't she come back?" Silas couldn't answer that, because deep down he was asking the same thing. The next morning, Elizabeth stayed in bed. She didn't open the curtains, didn't check the news, didn't eat. Tess came by around 11 and let herself in. She sat on the edge of the bed holding coffee and a small brown paper bag. "From the art kids," she said. "They brought it to the center this morning even though you weren't there." Elizabeth peeked inside. A note. Crayon hearts. A drawing of her holding hands with a stick figure in headphones. She blinked back something sharp. "I'm not famous," she whispered. "You're not supposed to be," Tess said. "You're supposed to be Elizabeth. Not mystery woman. Not maybe girlfriend." Elizabeth pulled the blanket tighter. "Then why do I feel like a headline?" Across the city, Silas stood outside a shuttered classroom window watching a security guard try to tape over the press notices on the front fence. He didn't go in. He couldn't. Instead, he pulled out his phone, drafted 10 texts, deleted them all, then finally typed, "Tell me how to fix this." He didn't hit send. Not yet. Instead, he looked up and wondered what it would cost to be a man who didn't just react to the world, but stood between it and the people he cared about. Silas Mitchell had built his reputation on silence. Silent boardrooms, silent negotiations, silent control. But this time, silence was the problem. He didn't announce the press conference. He didn't warn the board. He didn't even change into a suit. He just walked to the podium in a gray sweater and said what needed saying. "There's been a lot of noise lately," he began, his voice steady, "so let me offer you something different, truth." Reporters shifted in their seats. Cameras zoomed in. Silas continued, "Some of you know me as a CEO. Some know me only from headlines. But before any of that, I was a husband. And now I'm a father. That's the title I care about most." He held up something then. A folded piece of paper. It wasn't a memo. It was Russell's drawing 3 stick figures, a boy in headphones, a tall man, and a woman with a scarf. Underneath, Team Unexpected. "This story you've all been spinning," Silas said, "isn't about scandal. It's about a boy who smiled for the first time in weeks. Because someone sat beside him instead of above him." He didn't name her. He didn't have to. But his voice dipped quiet, intimate, and it was clear who he meant. "So let me be clear, if your headlines hurt her, you're not exposing anything. You're erasing kindness. And I won't stand for that." Then he folded the drawing again and walked off stage. Elizabeth watched the video from her couch, curled into the same blanket she hadn't moved from in 2 days. Tess sat beside her, speechless. "That man would burn the internet for you," she said. Elizabeth didn't smile. She was still staring at the screen. "No," she whispered. "He wouldn't." She paused the video, zoomed in on the drawing, then said quietly, "He's protecting Russell. I just happened to be standing next to him." Later that night, she heard a knock at the door. Soft, hesitant. She didn't move. Another knock. Then a voice. "It's me, Silas." She opened the door just enough to see his face, drawn, tired, but open. "I saw your press thing," she said. "I meant every word." She didn't answer right away. "Then, I got suspended." "I know. They think I manipulated him. That I chased you." "You didn't. They're not sure I should be around kids anymore." Silas closed his eyes for a second, pained. "That's not who you are." "I know that," she said. "But does the world?" There was silence. Not cold, just heavy. Then he pulled something from his coat pocket. A small envelope. Inside, Russell's latest drawing. A woman holding a flashlight and a book. Next to her, the boy in headphones. The title, "She Still Sees Me." Elizabeth blinked. "I miss him," she whispered. "So does he." She looked up at Silas. "And you." He didn't hesitate. I miss you in ways I don't know how to say. They didn't talk long, just long enough to remember what peace had once felt like. Before she closed the door, Silas placed a second envelope in her hand. This is from my lawyers, he said. But I didn't read it. She nodded. Later that night, she did, and wished she hadn't. It was a drafted non-disclosure agreement. Dry language, cold phrasing, terms and clauses and payment options in the event of media fallout. It was dated before the press conference, before he ever knocked on her door. She felt her hands tremble as she read. There was no signature, no initials, just intent. Elizabeth sat back on the couch, the paper falling to the floor. The next day, she returned the drawing to him, but not with a smile. I thought we were being real, she said. We are. Then why does your legal team think I need a muzzle? Silas froze. What? She held up the NDA. This. I never approved that. But you knew about it. I didn't ask for it. I swear. They probably. You didn't stop it. There it was. The moment everything shifted, she handed him the envelope. I'm not your risk management strategy. You're not, he said, voice low. You're. Don't, she cut in. Not now. She stepped back. The door closed between them, and for the first time since they met, Silas didn't know how to fix it. That night, Russell sat silently at the kitchen table, his dinner untouched. He stared at a blank page in his sketchbook, crayons lined up neatly beside it. Silas sat across from him, not speaking either. Then Russell picked up a green crayon, began to draw. 10 minutes passed. Then he slid the page across the table. Silas looked down. It was Elizabeth, not smiling, just sitting on a bench beside Russell. The caption read, "She doesn't know if she belongs anymore." Silas swallowed hard, then reached for his coat. He didn't know what he'd say, didn't have a speech prepared. But he knew this. He had let someone else write a story that wasn't theirs to tell. And it was time to change that. The house was exactly as he'd left it. Dusty windows, quiet rooms, a chipped mug still sitting by the sink. Silas hadn't stepped into the cottage since the funeral. It had been his wife's favorite place, tucked between trees, near a gray shoreline, where the waves never stopped talking. He used to think the silence here would break him. Now it was the only thing that didn't lie. He lit a fire in the hearth, unwrapped the same wool blanket she used to wear like a cape, sat on the floor with a mug of coffee that had long gone cold, and remembered her laugh, the way she'd place her hand on Russell's back when he was scared, how she'd whisper, "Breathe with me," when Silas couldn't find words. He remembered the last time they came here. Russell had just turned 3. The candles on the cake had gone out too fast. But she'd smiled like nothing was missing. He missed her. But more than that, he missed who he had been when she was alive. Brave, kind, open. The kind of man who believed in things. Now he wasn't sure what he believed in anymore, except a woman with paint on her sleeves who'd made his son smile, and then walked away. 2 hours away, Elizabeth sat at her mother's kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. "I don't want to talk about it," she said softly. Her mother didn't push. She just set a fresh towel beside her and started slicing apples the way she used to when Elizabeth was a child. Slow, careful, precise. "Sometimes love isn't a door you walk through," she said gently. "It's a window someone forgot to close." Elizabeth blinked. "That doesn't make sense." "It will." The local library called her the next day, asked if she'd like to sub for story time. She said yes, because saying yes to anything felt better than feeling nothing. She wore her dinosaur slippers, read her favorite book about kindness, and smiled when the children clapped. but her heart wasn't in it. Not really. It was still back in a museum cafe, where a boy had once drawn a family that didn't exist. Yet, back in the city, Russell wasn't speaking. Not to his teachers. Not to Laurel. Not even to Silas. He walked through rooms like a shadow, dragging his sketchbook like a trailing kite. Silas tried everything. New headphones, their favorite cartoons, even pancakes for dinner. Nothing worked. Until one night, after Silas had finally given up and turned off the lights, Russell tiptoed down the stairs. He stood in front of his father holding a folded sheet of paper. Silas took it wordlessly, unfolded it, and froze. The drawing was of Elizabeth, but not like before. This time, she stood with her arms out, reaching toward a city skyline. Beside her, a boy in a cape, a man with his tie flapping like a flag, and a sign that read, "Make the world quieter again." Beneath it, Russell had written just one line, "I'm ready if you are." Silas didn't sleep that night. He paced. He thought. He called no one. Then he pulled out a notebook and made a list. Things that mattered. Things that didn't. On one side, stocks, headlines, noise. On the other, Russell. A drawing. Her. 3 days later, Elizabeth stepped into the community center where she used to teach. She'd been invited back for an art auction fundraiser. They wanted her to help paint a mural with the kids during the event. She agreed. The stage was already set. Tables covered in brown paper. Paint jars open. Children buzzing. She picked up a brush and smiled for the first time in days. Until someone tapped her shoulder. She turned and froze. Silas stood there in jeans and a navy sweater, hair slightly messy, a folder in one hand. No bodyguards. No press. Just him. And Russell. Russell held a small pail of paintbrushes and a sign that said, "Miss Ellie, we saved you a color." Elizabeth stared. She didn't speak. Not until Silas stepped closer and said, "We made a mistake." "I made a mistake. You didn't trust me." "I didn't know how to," he admitted. "But I'm learning." He handed her the folder. Inside, a printed announcement of a new donation to the center. "I sketchbook from Russell." And a handwritten note. "This isn't a favor. It's not a fix. It's a beginning if you still want it." Elizabeth looked at Russell. He was watching her carefully, fingers clenched tight around his brushes. She crouched, held out her hand. "Do I still get green?" Russell handed her 2 shades. Silas let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. And somewhere between spilled paint and new beginnings, something real returned. The kitchen smelled like garlic, cinnamon, and something else that had no name, just warmth. Elizabeth stood barefoot in one of Silas's oversized shirts, hair damp, a paint smudge still on her cheek. She stirred something on the stove while Russell sat cross-legged at the counter, drawing in his sketchbook with the kind of focus only kids and true artists possess. It didn't feel like a fairy tale. It felt better. It felt earned. "Do you need help?" Silas asked from the doorway, already reaching for mugs. "You always ask after I finish," Elizabeth teased. "Timing's never been my strong suit." She gave him a look. "I said timing," he added. "Not taste." Russell looked up. "You burned the toast again." Silas pointed at Elizabeth. "She distracted me." Elizabeth grinned. "He burned it before I walked in." Russell shrugged. "Teamwork." They all laughed. The sound echoed not through marble halls or mansions, but through the wooden frame of a real home. That afternoon, Russell presented them with the final page of his comic. Title, Team J. Final Mission, Stay. The cover showed 3 figures. Truth, the boy in headphones, holding a light. Courage, the tall man with open hands and no mask. Kindness, the woman with a shield made of a library card and a flashlight raised high. Underneath, they didn't save the world. They just saved each other. Elizabeth blinked fast. Silas pulled her gently into his side. And Russell, as if nothing major had happened, said, "Can we get pizza now?" The Legacy Gala arrived 1 week later. Silas hadn't planned on going, but Russell had insisted. "They think you only care about money," he'd said. "They should see who you bring." So he did. Elizabeth wore a navy dress, simple, quiet, unshiny. She did her own hair, wore the same shoes she used to teach in. Russell wore a clip-on tie with tiny T-Rexes and superhero socks that peeked out beneath his slacks. Silas wore no tie at all. They arrived as a unit, not loud, not flashy, just real. The ballroom paused. Heads turned. His uncle approached first, smile tight. "Well, this is unexpected." Silas didn't flinch. "She's the best part of my story." His uncle raised an eyebrow. "And the child?" Russell lifted a folded paper and held it over his head. It read, "Kindness is never a mistake." The room fell silent. They didn't stay long, just long enough for the photo. The three of them under a crystal chandelier. No labels, no hashtags, no apologies, just presence. Weeks passed. The press moved on. Russell returned to school. Elizabeth returned to the classroom, officially this time. The children welcomed her with a crayon banner and dinosaur stickers. One student handed her a note that read, "My mommy says you're brave." She taped it above her desk. Silas changed too. He still worked, still built things, but he also showed up to story time, painted walls, burned waffles, and stopped wearing the armor of silence because he didn't need it anymore. One Saturday morning, Elizabeth stepped onto the porch with a mug of tea and saw Russell burying something near the garden. "What are you up to?" she asked. He wiped his hands on his jeans. "Our secret." She crouched beside him. He pointed. Buried just under the soil, a green plastic dinosaur, with a tiny scroll wrapped around its tail. She gently pulled it out and read the words. This is where Team Jaylee began. That night, as fairy lights blinked above the porch and rain tapped gently on the railing, Silas pulled Elizabeth close. "You know," he whispered, "I never believed in second chances." She smiled into his chest. "You didn't get one. You made one." Then she kissed him, not with urgency, but with certainty, like someone choosing home. And somewhere inside the house, Russell murmured in his sleep, "Mission complete." There were no headlines the next morning. No cameras. No scandals. Just three people at a kitchen table. Pancakes. Spilled syrup. Smiles. No scripts. No performances. Just love. And a final drawing on the fridge. 3 figures. 1 family. Beneath it, written in thick, determined letters. The end. Just kidding. Because some stories aren't meant to end at all.
Bye, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.